everyone, it's James from eRV, and I'm here with Nick from Winnebago's Advanced Technology Group, and we are in the eRV, right? And this, for those of you who don't know, is an all electric RV. There's no fossil fuels burning in this thing at all,
100% electric.
Okay, and is this, just to be very clear, is this something people can buy or look for? What is Advanced Technology Group, and how did this vehicle come about?
Sure, yeah. Great to be here. Excited to share about this eRV. So the Advanced Technology Group is a small but mighty team within the Winnebago Industries organization. So we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy working on projects that might be 3 to 5 years from commercialization, but we help out all of the business units. So we get to dabble in boats with Chris Craft and Barletta, but we also get to do RVs with the Winnebago Outdoor Group, Grand Design, and Newmar. So we like to kind of get exposure to a lot of different areas and see what overlying technologies kind of bridge between all those different groups and how we can improve our products from a long-term standpoint and understand how it improves the customer experience.
Okay, so like a number of years ago when we did a video on the Winnebago Revel, and then but it was just a concept at the same time, and then it like showed up like a year and a half later. This isn't necessarily that same thing. You're more just exploring the technologies and what's possible and what you can do with an electric RV.
Exactly, yeah. The big focus of our group is to really understand the technology, learn about the technology itself, and understand how it could impact our customers. So there's many things that we will try out and explore just for the sake of learning. So it's very educational, and we're meant to kind of look under all those rocks, not sure what we'll find, but sometimes we find some pretty exciting stuff.
Okay, so now getting down to this particular vehicle. This is based on a Ford Transit, but did you start with the electric Transit or did you start with something else? And what does the battery situation look like? Give me the basics.
Yeah, we'll start with those nuts and bolts. So the project began about 3 years ago, just ahead of COVID. So when we started, we said, we know there's a trend around electrification, but we need to understand how that trend starts to intersect with RVing. So that's how we kind of came up with the idea of what would an all-electric RV look like. Well, at the time, none of the major OEMs had any fully electrified chassis. There wasn't the e-Transit, Mercedes didn't have their e-Sprinter, Dodge didn't have anything. So we could either wait for something to come out, or we could decide to build it ourselves.
Okay.
And being a group that doesn't like to sit around, we decided to build it ourselves.
Right on.
So you're exactly right. This started as a traditional Ford Transit,
okay,
built down in Kansas City. And then we took the traditional Ford Transit and partnered with a company in Colorado called Lightning E-Motor.
Okay.
And their whole business is repowering combustion vehicles. So they pulled out the engine, the transmission, and the fuel tanks, and they put in a motor, some batteries, and a motor control system. And so that's how we got our electrified platform. Now the beauty is we actually got the benefits of the Ford Transit because the body is exactly the same design as any other Ford Transit. So from a layout standpoint, from accessories, everything there was a new integration or an existing integration, very familiar territory. But on the powertrain side, we had a little bit more flexibility to get a little bit deeper into the system. And we'll talk about that in a little bit of some of those advantages.
Yeah, so basically like all the bodybuilder specs, none of that changed.
Exactly.
You had that template to work from. Okay, so now let's talk about the batteries. How big are they? How much power have we got in watt hours or whatever terms you want to give it to me?
Sounds good. So we've got two 43 kilowatt hour batteries, and they sit on either side of the drive shaft because when the transmission was pulled out, that's where the electric motor went in. So it still is a rear wheel drive vehicle. There's still a drive shaft, a rear differential on that rear axle.
Okay.
But two 43 kilowatt batteries, they're pulled together, so it's essentially one 86 kilowatt battery, and that powers everything. The traction, actually moving the vehicle, as well as all of the major house loads.
So 86 kilowatt hours?
Yes.
Okay, so that's like 4+ times the size of our battery.
Yeah.
Bank. And we can run the air conditioner for like 14 hours or so. So that's quite an impressive power pack. So what's the range? Let's get to that.
So for this one, we're looking at about 125 miles, 120 miles, and we realized that is a little bit on the lower side.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when we started the project, it was either that or nothing. So we thought 125 was pretty good. The other thing is technology continues to improve so rapidly that because some of the technology in here is a few years old, if we were to upgrade those batteries, just newer technology, but same form factor, same chemistry, we'd be looking at closer to 170 miles. So just in that short time, the benefits are naturally getting more and more. And our thing is on the range side, yes, it will take care of itself eventually, because we really wanted to focus on what that integration from the electrification to the RV side looks like. So in time, the range will take care of itself. But we've heard from many people that, you know, over 200, closer to 300 is kind of that sweet spot where things will get really exciting.
Right. And does this have like regenerative braking, for example? So if you're going down a mountain grade, you're actually charging your battery. So depending on where you're driving, you might get more than that 120 miles.
Yep.
Okay, now speaking of the integration that you mentioned between the vehicle and the house systems, so it's the same one battery pack that we're using for both locomotion and everything in the house?
Yep.
Okay, so like the air conditioner, how does that work? Do we have an inverter running for that, or what's going on there?
So for the high draw systems where you've got the main propulsion of the vehicle, but then if you look at like an inverter, an air conditioner, and our water heater, one of the big things we wanted to explore is, you know, how can we be more efficient? And we're still pulling together the data on the actual efficiency improvement. But with those large draw house appliances, we were able to work out some systems, both on the appliances themselves as well as on the lightning side, to pull those together. So our inverter is a 6 kilowatt 350 volt. Yes, you could weld with this thing.
That's awesome.
But we've got a 6 kilowatt inverter that's 350 volt pulled directly off the batteries. The water heaters, 350 volt pulled directly off the batteries, and same with this air conditioner, 350 volt pulled directly off the batteries. So it saves us those jumps of converting and inverting and reconverting,
right,
and just makes it a lot more pure.
But then you must have a 12 volt DC converter in here somewhere, because there's still 12 volt stuff.
Spot on. So the vehicle came with a 12 volt AGM battery, and that runs a lot of the traditional dash systems, you know, your radio, your screens, stuff like that. But we tapped into that to run the lights, the vent fans, and the refrig. So yes, there is kind of a secondary battery in there, and that is ultimately recharged one of two ways. So one, there's a DC to DC converter, which acts similar to an alternator, where it takes the power from the vehicle, steps it down to 12 volt, and charges that 12 volt battery. The other way we're keeping that topped off is we do have a couple 100 watts of solar on here.
Okay.
Now we get a lot of questions of why not put more solar on, why not recharge the traction batteries?
You have to step up the voltage to 350 volts to charge the batteries.
Well, and if you just do the quick math of, you know, 86 kilowatt hours, 1,000 watts of solar, you're going to sit there in 86 hours of sunshine. So I think in time we might do a little bit more to explore that, but we thought, hey, if we can get some solar just to keep this 12 volt battery topped off, run the fridge, run the vent fans, that'd be a step in the right direction.
Nice. So charging, you mentioned charging the 12 volt battery, but now how do we go about charging the big battery?
The big boy,
so what do we do? How do we do that?
So there's a few different options. The nice thing about this system is it is DC fast charge capable. And what that means, if you go to a level 3 charger, you know, whether it's an Electrify America, whether it's ChargePoint, whether it's EVgo, you can get that 350 volts immediately into the battery. No converting, no inverting, no going through a charger. And what that does is it provides a charge time of about 45 minutes to an hour. So you might drive for an hour and a half, 2 hours on that 120-ish miles, stop for an hour or so, you can lay down, take a nap, have your lunch, do some work, charge up in about an hour, and then drive for another hour and a half or so. Now, the other thing people seem to always kind of overlook is there's a huge charging network already in place, especially for RVers.
Oh yeah.
And that's because this can charge at any campground, just plugging it into a normal 50 amp or 30 amp pedestal.
Nice.
Runs through a little adapter. And this charge time is a little bit slower. You're going to look at an overnight charging situation there.
But if you're camping.
Right, exactly. And the beauty is you can roll in, you know, with very little battery, plug in, use all of the house loads like you normally would, have a good night's sleep, and then wake up the next morning and you're already ready to go, for the next day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and then solar, you mentioned, only charges that. We do have regenerative braking. Okay. So we've talked about the big things, the air conditioner, 350 volt air conditioner.
It's a spicy one.
Yeah. And water heater. Cabin heat, is that an electric heater as well on the 350 volt side?
Yeah, so for this one, the air conditioner is also a heat pump. So we do get a little bit of heat from that. But the other thing we did from a heating and cooling standpoint is we kind of pushed it as much as we could from an insulation standpoint.
Okay.
So it's hard to see, but within the different crevices and nooks and crannies, we've stuffed rock wool. We've lined with the foil bubble wrap. And then we've also added a little bit of mass-loaded vinyl
Nice.
to kind of help with some of the acoustic insulation as well. Because, as we know, electric vehicles are a little quieter and you start to hear other noises. So we really did our best to make sure that things were insulative, both from a thermal standpoint as well as from an acoustic standpoint.
Okay, just as an aside, I just did a video where I talked about mass loaded. Did you use it on vertical surfaces, or is it just mainly on the floor? Or?
I think it was one of those things we put it about everywhere we could put it.
Wow, so you got it.
I can't remember where specifically it went, but I know if there was an empty space, we slapped some on there because we figure if nothing else, it'll only help.
All right. So now, other stuff in here, I see you've got a vent fan, you've got water pumps, that sort of stuff. Does that work off the 12 volt system that's also charging the...
Yep, 12 volt off the water pump.
Okay. What about water storage? I'm assuming it's pretty standard, just a tank and the pump and a waste tank underneath or something.
Yeah, so this one we wanted to have a fairly complete RV experience, so we didn't want to degrade any of the existing features. So I think it's got 25 gallons of fresh water, 17 gallons of gray water, and about 15 gallons of black water.
Okay.
And that was one thing as we worked through this design, through this layout. Again, we didn't want to leave anything out because we really truly wanted to understand, again, what that electrification and RVing looks like.
Okay. The surfaces in here, like I'm looking at the upper cabinets, and I'm assuming, I think it goes without saying, this is probably all LED lighting.
Yep.
But I've noticed like some kind of disco lights and stuff you had in the floor. What was that about?
So within this kind of major project, there was a lot of little projects as well, and you could look at the air conditioner that's 350 volts. You could look at kind of the exploration of insulation and some of the benefit we saw from that. But one of them was how to use lights to convey information. And so we used a lot of LED strips kind of throughout the vehicle, but they're actually programmable. Mm-hmm. And what's neat with that is you can get some of these different moods. You can have the disco party, you can have kind of the light twinkle of stars at night. But probably one of the neatest things we were able to do with it is tie it to the system so that when you plug in to charge, the lights in the floor as well as the ground effect lights on the outside, they kind of act like a thermometer and will actually show you what your charge level is.
Like red to green?
That's right, exactly. So you could just take a quick glance and see what your charge status is.
So that you don't even have to look at a control panel. Although there is one. Is that like a Firefly? Is it reading off the canvas?
No, this was another one of those sub-projects where, because of the complexity of understanding and managing the electrical system as well as how that ties into all the appliances, both from just a power flow, but also from a power degradation, because it's a little exciting but also scary that is just one main battery source. And so we want to make sure that the house side and the chassis side talk together extremely well, so you can build in some protections where, let's say at 30% maybe the microwave will cut off, and maybe at 25% the air conditioner will cut off, and then maybe at 20% everything on the house side cuts off, just so you can still get from point A to point B if necessary.
Right.
But to manage that tight relationship, that's where we're able to bring in our control system, and then layer on top of that, simple things like HVAC control, lighting control, and tank monitoring.
You mentioned a microwave. Do you have a 350 volt microwave?
Not quite. No. That's through the inverter though, but
okay.
Yeah.
So I started to mention the surfaces. You've done, I don't see any latches on the cabinets, for example. Have you done other exploratory stuff with the cabinets and the storage in here?
Yes, there's quite a few little things that came together when you start looking at the materials and the layout and how a lot of that was kind of intertwined with one another. The big thing is, when we thought of the materials, we wanted a couple things. Authenticity. So we didn't want a plastic panel that looked like it was wood. if it looked like it's wood, it should actually be wood.
You should be a woodworker.
Exactly.
Because I feel the same way.
And then the other part of it was trying to be not necessarily 100% green, you know, and really pushing forward with that, but trying to be a little bit more eco-friendly or a little bit more renewable where possible. And so as you start looking around at some of the materials, I mean, you can look at this table and look at the overhead cabinets. This looks like wood because this is actually wood. Now it's just a veneer.
It's a veneer, yeah.
And so what that does is it allows us to kind of get what I'd say is kind of that third point of importance, and that's the performance side of it. So you get the authenticity of true wood-looking table, but you get the performance because it's actually lightweight plywood that provides the structure. And that's the same for the cabinets. So you get that balance of, you know, how do we save and manage weight, but how do we get kind of an authentic looking material? But as you start looking around at some of the other materials, there's part of the floor that is actually made up of about a third recycled rubber.
Right.
Kind of this impact resistant flooring.
Looks like a gym floor.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And the idea is this is kind of that spot where you can throw your gear, your hockey bag, or, you know, it's just stuff you want to throw in and then buzz down the road and not have to get it all packed away. But if you look at like the couch, a lot of the material that you'll see is kind of a woolen material, and that is 100% wool. And the nice thing about wool is it's naturally insulative, it's a little bit warmer, it absorbs sounds, and it's
soft.
Renewable. It's soft too. So if you look at the couch, if you open up some of the cabinets, you start to see we've lined them with a little bit of wool, and again, some slight insulation, but also acoustic insulation to keep things a little bit quieter. And then the last thing from kind of an interior layout standpoint is you said, you know, some of the cabinets don't have latches. Well, they do, but they were just integrated in such a way that they blend in. So we've got like dark blue lowers and matte black handles, and so they'll kind of blend together.
Right.
But if you look kind of towards the shower in the rear, we actually kept that cabinet dark all the way to the ceiling, and that starts to get into a little bit of the, not necessarily optical illusion, but, you know, darker colors are typically more slimming. So with that dark next to the bright walls kind of gives that slimming contrast and makes the vehicle feel a little bit more open.
Makes it, yeah, not so much of that wasp waist kind of thing. Okay, cool. Anything else we should know? I see a 12-volt fridge. I mean, this is all pretty standard stuff. Oh, one thing, you mentioned throwing a hockey bag in here. So is that, now with a range of only 120 miles, obviously you've got probably a different use case than, say, like us right now, we're on like a cross-country trip, right? So this is probably not targeted at that kind of market. So where, I mean, if this were to become a product now, and I realize it's not, what do you see as sort of the typical use case for a vehicle like this?
That's one of those tricky questions to answer because I know there's been many times throughout Winnebago Industries history where you launch a product with a very intentional market. You think it's going to perform a very specific way and appeal to a very specific group of people. And then everyone comes out of the woodworks because they start finding these other applications and these other use cases. And we could see this being used anywhere from somebody that might want to go across country. Granted, it'll be a little bit slower, but we did a trip from Washington, D.C. back to the Twin Cities. Okay. 1,300 miles. We took a few days to do it, but it was a very leisurely trip. It was awesome because you were almost incentivized to drive at, 50, 55 miles an hour, even though it can go 70. If you drive slower, you're more energy efficient per mile. So you might spend another 10 minutes in the seat, but you might be able to skip a charging stop and save an hour off your trip. So if you slow down, you might get there sooner. But we know that there's, kind of that long-term road trip as an application. But then there's a lot of people that they might use this as a daily driver. I mean, you think about being great outdoors. There's many places you can be outdoors, a local county park or even a city park, or think about taking your kids to soccer practice where maybe you get there 45 minutes early so they can warm up and get stretched out for a game. Yeah. And you can come back here and work on some stuff, relax, be in your warming or cooling hut, maybe have a little bit of internet connectivity and get some stuff done. But it's a kind of higher frequency use of the vehicle, but lower duration. And so if you look at kind of this road trip or this more being great outdoors locally, we've kind of got the bookends of the situation, and I think we're expecting anywhere and everywhere in between people might find a use for this.
Cool. Yeah, I know the Revel. I don't think people ever anticipated someone would live full time in a Revel.
Right.
But people do. So, okay, cool. Any final thoughts anything you want to make sure that people know about this? Like, don't go rushing and asking your Winnebago dealer where you can get one, but anything else?
Well, the big part of this project is it isn't just understanding the technology and how it integrates, but we're really big on what we call co-creation. And many times there's companies that will try to come up with the next big thing, but they'll do it in a vacuum, they'll do it in isolation. And then at the end of this long stretch, they take it to the customer and say, we've got exactly what you need. And the customer says, well, not really. And so we're trying to avoid that by capturing feedback, having conversations, kind of sharing our work, sharing our progress with people, saying, what did we get right and what can we do better with? And it's over time through those conversations that we ultimately hope to provide a much better product and a much better experience. So you're right in the sense that you can't run to the store and grab this right now, but we would love to hear everyone's feedback and understand what could be done differently.
One final question for you then. What are the next plans for this particular vehicle? Is it going on the road? Are you taking it to RV shows? What's sort of the schedule for this thing?
Yeah, so this we use it in a couple different ways, or in the next few months there'll be a couple different things. One, it's a great conversation piece. So we're getting lots of requests to bring this to different shows, to different groups, just to talk about some of our learnings and kind of what we're coming up against, what's been really well, what have been some interesting challenges, and just kind of telling the story. The other thing, and this kind of goes in line with the co-creation standpoint, is actually using it for more validation and more testing. You know, we have this great idea, but, you know, actually taking it out and doing a little bit of camping in it, or using it as a daily driver, or maybe doing some more road trips.
Do you need volunteers for the camping
thing? We've got your name, don't you worry. But it was pretty eye-opening on that road trip from DC to the Twin Cities. I know there were some members of the team that were very apprehensive at first, just because it's something new for a lot of people, but by the second day we were cruising and grooving, and it was amazing that we were able to hit all fast chargers for that entire trip, and they were stationed about every 70 to 90 miles, and it was just drive for an hour and a half and then charge and just kind of keep moving along. And a lot of people don't realize how much charging there already is. Granted, there could always be more, but I kind of akin it to, you know, when you purchase a new car or a new RV or new vehicle, you don't really notice it until once you have it, then you start noticing it everywhere else.
Right.
And once we had a need for charging, I started noticing how much charging there was everywhere. So it's kind of the equivalent of sailing versus motorboating. There's a little bit more of a challenge, but a little bit more exciting adventure.
Okay. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up here with the eRV from Winnebago's Advanced Technology Group. And thank you, Nick, for walking us through this. So now, if you're interested, maybe you'll see it in an RV show near you.
Time will tell.
But you can always, on the page on the Fit RV that'll be linked in the YouTube description, you can come by and leave comments, ask questions, and we'll do our best to get them answered or pass them along for your input for future vehicles. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you later. Bye now.